Good evening and welcome to tonight's program. I'm Dennis Scully, the host of the Business of Home podcast. I'm also the curator of the Dialogues on Design series at the New York School of Interior Design. Through subscriptions and sponsorships, these conversations raise money for our scholarship programs, including our Diversity Scholarship and our Pre-College Scholarship program, where we hope to introduce interior design as a career path for young people from often underrepresented communities. I'm grateful to all of those who have helped make this series possible and want to give special thanks to Benjamin Moore, Charlotte Moss, Holly Hunt, Cravat, and the Shade Store. Your generosity is greatly appreciated by the school and the students. Tonight I'm joined by the worldly and talented AD100 designer Joy Moyler. Joy has worked with some of the biggest names in the industry and is going to share with us what she's learned along the way in her remarkable career. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Joy Moyler. Joy, I am so excited to have you here, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Dennis, for having me. I totally appreciate your taking the time to speak to little old me.
Well, I'm thrilled, and audience members will be thrilled as well when they get to hear from you. One of the things that we're focusing on this season, and why I'm particularly glad to kick off this series with you, is talking a little bit about mentors and people who have influenced designers' careers. And you have worked for such an incredibly stellar array of design and architecture professionals that I can't wait to get into all of it with you. So where should we start? I know that you fell in love with architecture from a young age. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I fell in love with architecture during a trip to Spain. I was walking down the street and literally was struck in the head by a fragment of stone that had fallen off of a basilica designed by Antonio Gaudi. And after coming to with a little trickle of blood between my eyes and not losing eyesight, I
Thankfully.
absolutely was marveled at the structure because it was absolutely unlike anything I'd ever seen before. And upon return home, I just really launched into studying everything I could possibly find about Gaudi and was mesmerized by his use of materials and lack of using any geometric form to construct his projects. And I just started a deep dive into all forms of architecture, classical, contemporary, anything I could put my hands on. Vitruvius, deep dive into Vitruvius's study of scale and modern man, modern man is affected by architecture. And yeah, it was deep. It was deep.
Was Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, was that your first job out of school?
My first real job was with Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. It involved many years of working till 2 or 3 in the morning, literally going home for a quick nap and arriving back at my desk at 8:30 the next morning. So I literally still have bags under my
That
eyes
that
from
just sounds
those.
brutal. Now, why was everyone asked to work as many hours and as hard as you were? What were you doing? What was going on at the time?
Firstly, it was the 80s. Everyone was making a great deal of money.
I
The
see.
partners were working on esteemed projects up and down Park and Madison Avenue for financial concerns who had buckets and buckets of money. And as a result, the worker bees, including myself, I was a junior designer, were granted the illustrious responsibility of delivering all the drawings that were required to support these projects.
I
And the
see.
projects were plentiful. It was a firm of about 250 people. We were divided into architecture and interiors. I started at SOM in architecture prior to migrating to the interiors group. And that's just the way it was. It was one of the most incredible places I've ever worked and one of the hardest places that I've ever worked. And it taught me many, many business skills that I utilize to this day. And I am forever grateful that that's where I got my real start in this industry.
So despite the long hours, it was worth it for you in other ways.
It was absolutely worth it, and I would literally come home and cry to my parents and say, "Oh my god, what have I done? I wanna get into fashion, architecture's killing me." And my dad literally said, "You're paying your dues. Later in life, no one can take anything from you because of the work that you're doing now." And he was absolutely right about it, and I wish he was still alive so I can tell him thank you every day. Every time I get a new project, every time I get a new client, I'm grateful to my dad for his generous words of just telling me to stick with it, because the pep talks that he would give me at 3 o'clock in the morning to turn around and go back in and continue working the next day were absolutely invaluable. And more than anything, those words taught me that if you're going to do something, do it all the way through. Don't expect every day to be easy. Don't expect every client to be perfect. You're signing up to do something, you're signing up to lay the groundwork for your career, and you owe it to yourself to do this. You owe it to yourself when you're 20 something, 30 something, 40 something, that if you are absolutely committed to a craft, you've got to dig in deep, because later no one can take it from you.
Tell me how you transitioned from working for these great big architectural firms to working more for interior designers and those sort of shops.
I was bitten by the interiors bug during my days at Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. When things slowed down and there was a financial disaster and there wasn't a lot of building going
Mm.
on, I was asked if I wanted to start working with the interiors group. And of course, I loved the constant paycheck. So I was not going to say no and end up on the unemployment line.
Keep my job, I'd love to,
Yes,
thank
keep
you.
my job. I'd love to. Benefits, of course, right? And I really just became enamored with textiles. I've always loved textiles. My mom was in advertising and a fiber artist. She was a quilter, and I always loved textiles, particularly damask. And when I was asked to work with the interiors group, bells just went off in my head, and just the different finishes of parchment and makassar ebony and lacquer, and being able to use all of these different materials in projects where you saw the results much quicker than working on an architectural project that took 3 years to build. You can quickly see an interiors project come together, and that truly excited me. I popped over to John Saladino. I'll go back to that. But I later worked at Ralph Lauren, the world of Ralph Lauren, and his strong ability to create a lifestyle image before you even step into the store. You see it occur at the windows. The windows pull you in. The window may only be 6 feet wide and 2 feet deep, but when you look into the window of a Ralph Lauren storefront, you're seeing the fireplace appears to be lit. You see a jar of olives, a martini glass with faux ice cubes. You see someone sitting as though they're about to have this drink. Someone else is standing rather dapperly, in the midst of conversation. And you really just start to see the power of lifestyle. And I just love that environment of having someone experience something they didn't know they wanted but needed to have before they even walked into the door. And the power of storytelling. And I just absolutely love that. And I worked on redesigning the Ralph Lauren Beverly Hills store several times, and Palm Beach, and other stores as well, and just an opportunity to travel and create these lifestyles for the consumers was just a magical experience. And I spent over 7 years doing that within the creative services group, and I absolutely loved it. And then I moved on to Giorgio Armani, where I essentially did the same thing for the Giorgio Armani Casa brand, and working with celebrities there who were ambassadors to Giorgio Armani.
You mentioned John Saladino,
Yes.
an icon. So tell me when you sort of end up working with him, because I do want to get to some of the images that you've brought and talk about some of what you've learned from all of these people. But Terry Despont and John Saladino, both, you spent time in both of those shops. So tell me
Yes.
briefly about those experiences.
Yes, John Saladino is the queen of orator, and so compelling and so interesting and so funny. And he would sit with his ascot and, recite 18th century poetry. And we would have lunch together and use the grapes clippers, for grapes at lunch. And he really just taught me to use color in the most interesting ways. His palette play tends to be a very pale aesthetic, but they still create a depth in the room when needed. And they also are the star of the room in very unexpected ways. So he taught me a love of lavender, a love of celadon colors, and how well they can be used together. And also the importance of creating a backdrop. Particularly with John, it was the use of tapestry and sort of vintage tapestry, how they would have such a presence on the back wall as a sort of backdrop to this wonderful environment that's created from pale colors versus very saturated textiles. And I always found that to be really, really an interesting approach from him.
Mm. And is that something that you found yourself sort of borrowing perhaps a bit when you moved forward, or at least that sensibility that he was trying to create?
I have used it typically for women in boudoirs, not necessarily my bachelor entertainment clients. They don't
Right.
particularly gravitate towards the pale celadons and pinks and lavenders, but I have used it in women's sort of sanctuaries and things of that level. But the use of tapestries and sort of soft artwork versus hanging a picture or something, I've definitely adapted as well.
Interesting. And quickly, Terry Despont, what was that experience like?
Yeah, that was kind of going back to one of those crazy sort of days again, where if you left at 6 o'clock, everyone looked at you as though you were working half day, you know. But the projects were absolutely stellar. Terry's an amazing artist, so I always was enamored by his ability to see an image, see a palette that's presented to him, say in schematic design or the conceptual phase, literally just showing him a cluster of 6-inch squares of textiles or hard architectural finishes or onyx or something. Terry would literally take that imagery and a very schematic floor plan, go back to his studio, and come back with the most amazing rendering of a space that's 36 inches by 24 inches, that you literally feel that if you looked at it sort of within this framework, you have been transported to Versailles or some
Hmm.
amazing palace somewhere, that he's literally rendered just from looking at these textiles. And also with Terry, it working there just expanded my European vendor relationships, so that when I later started my own firm, I was able to jump in quickly and work on international projects because those relationships have already been established.
So let's pull up some of the images that you brought with you to today, and maybe we can get into how they
Some of
speak
those
to some of the way.
inspirations.
Yeah.
Let's have a look. This is a contemporary project on Central Park South. It was for a Milanese businessman who would visit New York maybe 4 times a year. And one of the things about this image that speaks to me is that celadon color used for a man's space. And
Hmm.
that's something that was definitely an approach from John Saladino. And instead of the use of tapestry on the wall, having a very captivating image. And the image doesn't have a great deal of color, but it really pulls you in just seeing this young boy listening to this shell. And it just creates a great framework for this very large sitting area.
Mm.
Yeah, so that palette is very John Saladino for me. That's very sort of creamy, textured upholstery of the sofa and the chair. This is a project that's a transitional space. This is something that I really took from this would very much be a Terry Despont influence because you see the cultural draping of a Mexican coverlet against the modernity of the cognac leather with the chrome chair and then the leather suitcase in the back, but then a very traditional framework on that samovar lantern and then graphic artwork. These are sort of elements that you would see very much repeated in a Terry Despont project. That sort of mixing of old with new, contemporary, but still refined. This is John
Oh.
Saladino all the way. This is also very Ralph Lauren. It's using one color, but that one color is shown in different scales and different pattern plays. And this is something that Ralph Lauren would often do in his home collection, and also something that John Saladino would do as well. And I just really love this space because it's very serene. There isn't a lot happening with the architecture, but it's just very comfortable. And the draping of the textiles on the window treatments and the bedding just makes it so comfortable. And who doesn't love a little pom pom?
Who doesn't love a little pom pom
I
on
love a
the
little
pillows
pom
there?
pom. And also this the fact that this pillow has a dual textile just makes it even more playful. This project, this I love this project. This was a golf resort that I designed. I did the interiors in Moscow, Russia. And
Mm.
this is a I'm definitely a designer who loves classical architecture. The architecture in this project is extremely classical, which I love. And I love the juxtaposition of leather against the chevron pattern floor, the tartan textile on the chair, and the seat of the wing chair, and then that soft, supple channel back leather banquette. These were very much Ralph Lauren influences with that particular textile and the chair. So I mean, I'll always be a Ralph girl. I jokingly call it Ralph Lauren University. There are many designers who have gone through Ralph Lauren organization who walk away with that love of classical mixed with traditional and transitional elements. And this is very much a Ralph Lauren project.
Well, and as you were saying earlier, the storytelling aspect as well that you learned from Ralph and that so many designers sort of speak to.
Yes, no question about it. The storytelling and just imagining in my head before the project was even built, because it took 5 years to complete this project, but just imagining the storytelling of walking through this French limestone structure that is massive It's about 120,000 square feet, and each room, each progression into the next space, you're just envisioning who's in that space and how they're dressed, and the level of the light in the space during the day, and as it becomes evening, as the sun is setting, and the movement of the window treatments in that Moscow breeze, and when you're sitting on the pavilion and you're looking out and you're seeing the snowfall, but you're sitting beside the fireplace with a Moscow mule in Moscow, you know,
What could be more
what
perfect?
could be more perfect as you're sitting beside the marble fireplace, sitting on these wonderful textiles and velvets and tartans and window pane flannels, and just creating that imagery before the structure's even built. Those have to be things that come from somewhere in your head, because you're also selling that to a client, and you're presenting it to them so that they can envision it as well and sign on for it and say, yes, we want that. And to see it come to fruition, and to be able to deliver that in real life, it is such an astonishing and exciting thing to do.
Wow, it sounds it. So now tell us what's happening here.
Oh my, this is a British country estate, and this room is so opulent. Firstly, we've got the world of hollyhock Lee Joffa textiles, which is so expensive in itself, and to have it in this magnitude is quite the thing. And this is a very well storied estate. And this sort of layering again of having the same pattern on the upholstery and the window treatments and the wall covering and the lampshade, you know, is quite majestic. And this is something that, Terry Despont would definitely do in his projects. Saladino would play with it, I think, on the upholstery and the window treatments, but not necessarily on the wall covering. Definitely not on that floor lamp. But the juxtaposition of the smooth leather, well, you might note that I have a thing for cognac leather. It's something that I use in all of my projects because I love it so much. So it appeared on the Channel back banquette in
Yes.
Moscow. It appeared on that modern chrome chair in the bedroom. It's everywhere, just because I love it. And I don't have a trademark thing, but that's definitely something that appears in every project. And this is something definitely that Terry would do. And Terry works on very grand residences. And I thought of him very much when I was working on this project, designing this particular space. It's also very British. And if I'm working in England, I want the project to appear as though it is in its home environment. I would not apply sort of those Saladino lavenders, pinks, and celadons into a
Right.
room of this nature because it just wouldn't be fitting. But again, there are definitely elements of layering that I would borrow from him, and I definitely borrowed from Terry Despont here as well. This is a project again in London. This is one of the bedrooms at that estate. And an element from John Saladino would be if you have a flat wall, such as the flat wall behind the bed, do something and make it interesting. So I did not use tapestry as he may have, but I used that ruffle along the framework and at the top just to create some interest and dimension to the frame. There's so much timber in this home. As you see the timber on the
Yes.
other wall, the idea of placing timber along that header would have been too heavy. So the use of the ruffle actually softens the room and
Hmm.
takes some of that weight out of it. Using it again at the window with the yeah, you can see the little of the window to the outdoors as well. Adds
Yeah.
another little pattern to the space. But I love a little ruffle, a little pom pom. Sort of makes the day sweet.
Definitely.
This is John Mayer's house
Oh,
along the Yellowstone River.
so beautiful.
And you walk out the door and it's such a sanctuary, just hearing the river sort of rolling through it. And he very much is, interested in comfortable things after being on the road all the time. It was most important to have a place that he could just kind of chill out and hang out with friends and fix a dinner here. So this is actually the guest house on the property, which is kind of the hangout space for his friends who, join him after coming home for a quick break on a tour, and it's where they relax. And this is a very Ralph Lauren environment as it's in Montana. And Ralph Lauren has wonderful, wonderful pieces that lend themselves to this environment. And so I used as much Ralph as I could possibly get on this project. Also because I have a wonderful relationship with them and they were able to get me pieces very, very quickly. And, beyond the design, one of the most important tools in your toolbox is the relationships that you have with vendors and their ability to assist in your delivering projects with, extraordinary short lead turnaround times. And Ralph
Can't
really,
stress those relationships enough.
especially right now, right? These relationships are everything. And
Sure.
about this project, John had originally given me a year to do the main house, the guest house, and the recording studio. And about 4 months in, he said, Joy, I have a break in my tour. I have 2 weeks and I want to come home. And there was no furniture
Oh.
in the main house nor the guest house. And he says, I know it's an impossibility, but I really just want to get off the road and go to Montana and listen to the river. And Ralph came through and delivered this guest house for me. So he was able to live there for 2 weeks and then go back on the road.
Hmm, that's great.
Yeah. So kudos to Ralph Lauren and vendors that you have a great relationship with. And this is the exterior of that England countryside estate again. And, I really developed my love for working in Europe from my days at Terry Despont. I worked with him there on the Dorchester and Kensington Palace Gardens, and I fell in love with working in London. And this project is truly an ode to him and my ability to jump in and work on a project with various currencies and working in the metric unit system because of the work that I did at Terry Despont. So I'm really grateful to that experience because it really jump started my own firm actually because most of my projects are in Europe. So have cutting my teeth on those projects with him created an opportunity for me to have my own firm. Also with Armani too. Yeah. So this is a project that I did at Armani. It was my first project with a client who I have since done 4 projects for. This was a New York project. And again, I mean, this project has a little bit of something from everyone I've ever worked with. The cultural elements I definitely get from Mr. Armani. That lantern is a very Japanese design. I definitely get that from my years of working with Giorgio Armani. And just the graphic kind of nature of that pillow, I think probably came from anywhere I've ever worked and my love of textiles with my mom. And it's a quilting
Hmm.
detail that my mom would use as well. So this very small space right here is truly the culmination of all the things that I've loved throughout design and architecture. This is a pool in the men's spa, again at Moscow.
Mm.
And it's a very simple space. But when you look at the detailing in the ceiling details, the black and white crispness of material, the marble patterning on the floor, it reminds me of, a project that I worked on at Terry Despont for the Mark. and also at the Carlisle, that black and white reception lobby floor. And when I was laying out the floor pattern here, the Mark and the Carlisle hotels are what came to mind.
It's stunning. Stunning. So it sounds as if you've really been able to, throughout your career, pull from all of the different people that you've worked with, and have found elements that can relate to your projects. And so it sounds as if you always, perhaps for better or for worse, have your past employers with you in one way or another.
It's so true. And I encourage young graduates, to not be so quick to jump out there and start their own businesses. I know a lot of people, they want to graduate and quickly get their business cards and hang a shingle and start their own design firm. But I truly encourage everyone to work for other firms first. That's the best way of determining, do you really love transitional work, modern work? Uh, are you a classical designer or modern designer? Figure out what you want to do. If you just jump in, you're going to be a one trick pony. And working for other firms really providing me an opportunity to learn on someone else's dime, right? Paycheck
Sure.
benefits, someone else's dime while you're studying your craft. And you're able to, again, really get those relationships with vendors going. Because when you are first starting out, if you're a new designer, vendors, they aren't even really going to pay you much attention. You can walk into a design showroom, they may not even acknowledge you, but if you walk in there with a business card that says Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, or Giorgio Armani, or Terry Despont, or John Saladino, you're going to get much better treatment, and they're going to show you things that are not even on the floor, because they want those firms to use those particular projects. You have an opportunity to work on archival textiles from Prel and embroideries from Lessange in Paris that would not even, you know, be put before you without having the opportunities and experiences that these firms who are constantly shown these wares have an opportunity to work on, right? So, even if you just take 2 years, work with a couple of firms, it'll be to your it'll be the best thing you've ever done for yourself and for your business.
And do you find that because you have such a global practice, it sounds like that too has been such a big influence on the kind of work that you do, and the kind of materials that you reach for when you think about a project?
Oh, absolutely. I always think globally. This is a global head, not a domestic one. Except now it needs to be domestic to try to get furniture on some projects when there's nothing around. But yeah, I mean, I've always had a global approach. I mean, that came from my parents since we were kids. We'd wake up in the morning, and, on Saturdays we'd have hamantash in little and you know, on the Lower East Side, and then we migrate to Little Italy for lunch, and then have Indian food for dinner. I've always had a global approach to life and living, and I hope that continues. So naturally, that sort of direction has infused my work as well. It's my zone, it's my lane, it's my wheelhouse.
Well, it's fascinating to get to see, and I really appreciate you sharing some of your work with us, and I thank you so much for sharing your time with us. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Dennis. Always a pleasure. And to the students out there, just keep grinding. When you have a hard day, remember, go home, take a shower. The next day gets better. And if you've got to work your butt off another couple of days after that, just keep doing it, because at the end, no one can take it from you.
Well, there you go. Life lessons from Joy Moyler. Thank you again, Joy. Such a pleasure.
Thank you. Best of life. Best of love. Ciao.
Ciao. Thank you again for joining us for another installment of our Dialogues on Design series. We have an impressive lineup in store for you this season, including conversations with Bunny Williams, David Kleinberg, Sheila Bridges, and many more. We'll be back every month with a new conversation throughout the school year. I'm grateful to all of our generous sponsors, board members, and subscribers, as well as to our producer, Jeremy Handelman, for making tonight's show possible. I'm Dennis Scully. From everyone here at the New York School of Interior Design, Stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you next time.